Buttigieg. He's a teacher, an advocate, an author of I Have Something to Tell You for Young Adults, and married to Secretary Pete, who was just here, talking about bridges and other things, which we're not going to talk about today. But I feel like as parents of young kids, some of what we connect on is how do you make sure that the world isn't overrun by the haters, or that I actually don't think there are more of them, but sometimes they're louder. And so I want to start here. You sort of go to places, and just saying I see you seems to lift up entire communities that have dealt with tragedy and feeling like, does anyone see me? And I wonder how that feels. Does it feel like it builds on itself, or does it feel like the bad guys are winning?
No, there's really good stuff happening out there.
There is?
Yes.
Okay, good.
That is one of the reasons why, I take my book into red and purple states.
Yeah.
Because I was that kid. I wrote the YA version of my book to be the book I wish I would have had in 8th grade. And so when I was growing up in conservative rural northern Michigan, I didn't know that there were gay people out there. I thought I was the only one. So part of the thing that I really love about going out on the road and talking with teachers and families and students is to be able to say, I see you, and it is okay, and that there are tons of people out here who have your back. But unfortunately, if you spend a lot of time on social media, then you might think that the bad guys are winning. But most people aren't spending all their day on social media. Social media, especially some platforms like Twitter, is a very, very small portion of the United States of America. A lot of other people have jobs to do. They have families to raise. They're not spending all their time beating other people up on social media. They're just going about their lives. So I like to be that person that comes in the room and says, it's going to be okay. There are other people that have your back, and that there is a better way forward.
Part of, I think, where the distortion field can overtake that reality, and I agree with you, is that you now have one party putting politics and policies behind the hate and the intolerance.
Yeah.
And that feels like not a bug or a blip, but a feature.
Yeah. And I think we need to pay attention to that. Like some of these figures, some of these voices aren't just rogue conservative figures. I mean, these are people who are being invited to dine at Mar-a-Lago. The Republican Party is, cozying up to people like this, elevating them, and then sometimes funding them to make sure that hate is elevated. And of course, it's, a vicious cycle. A lot of folks on the Hill are doing good work, but there are some people who are there. They're more interested in podcasting or posting online. They go on the floor of the House and they say something really mean, and then they clip it, they put it in an email, they put it on their podcast, and it's sort of, rinse and repeat. There are good people in Washington doing good things, but we should focus as well on the fact that the Republican Party is embracing violent political rhetoric. And I know for a fact that if I were to name some of those people right now, I would have death threats on my phone by the time I got back to my hotel.
Yeah. What's that like?
That's rough.
That climate.
That's rough because I've always, viewed politics as the vehicle that makes people's lives better and safer. I mean, that's why we have politicians and folks in Washington, so that we can focus on raising our kids and doing the things that we love. Their job is to go make our lives better and safer. And now that I'm a dad, I'm squarely focused on making sure I keep my kids safe. And so being in the public eye, but also wanting to do right by my kids is a very narrow tightrope to walk. And it is scary at times, but it also makes me want to keep sticking my head out and speaking up for other people, especially marginalized folks even in my own community, because in a way I got to grow up and become this person I wish I would have had. And I think some of us have to, think about how we use that platform and how do we lift other people up.
I always think too, and I see some of the threats that you and Pete face, and I think, oh my God, he's the one that's willing to go on Fox and listen to you. I mean, like, I always think it's what is that about? I mean, what do you feel like it's about?
Well, the thing when it comes to our family, I think is just scary to some folks. I mean, some folks obviously are vehemently opposed to LGBTQ rights and equality and marriage equality. Sometimes they won't come out and say it. But I mean, look at Speaker Mike Johnson has, a long track record of being an open homophobe. And so, of course, there are certain folks in that party who are obviously opposed to our family, but I think they're also scared of it because when you zoom out, any of them are welcome to come over on a Sunday, and see what it's like in our house. When you zoom out, we're just two parents going about our day and our lives just like every other parent. Yeah. It's Right now it's starting at 6 a.m., which I wish it was starting a little later. The kids have a much earlier wake-up time now. But, getting your kids up and doing the hair and brushing the teeth and trying to make breakfast, put them in the minivan, get them to school, come home, put dinner on the table, and raise them to be open-hearted and kind and loving American citizens.
And to keep their hearts open. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about, that tightrope, right? They're the engine, and the amount that you love your children is the thing that gets you to put yourself out there, right? Even if you get those, I think I'm on the same blast as you. I get some of those mean comments too. Yeah. But they are the thing that fills your heart with terror, right? When someone talks about hurting you.
Why wouldn't you want to just, scoop up your kids and get out of here, because they're the most precious thing in the world. And I mean, some people in that party have been coming after my kids since the day they were born. Since the day we announced we were fathers, they have been attacking those children. If I post a pic of my kids at the playground, they'll be in my mentions. And of course, again, like we talked about at the top, that isn't representative of every person in this country. But it's some of those major accounts that are lifting up those comments, being supported by Donald Trump, dining at Mar-a-Lago, being funded by some of the most extreme vocal voices in conservative politics. That's something we have to pay attention to. And yeah, I want to protect them, but I also want to make sure we get this moment right.
One of the things that hangs over the moment, like bated breath, is the Supreme Court saying out loud that they're coming for other rights. I mean, America is living through this apocalyptic reality of the right to abortion health care being taken away after 50 years, and it is a political earthquake. But they're not done. No. They're not done coming for IVF. It's happened in Alabama. They're coming for contraception, coming for the morning after pill. They're coming for marriage equality. So say the conservative justices.
Yeah. I mean, the writing's right there on the wall,
Literally.
big, bright red letters. And so we all should be very open-eyed about this. When it comes to this election, this is the most consequential election of our lifetimes. And I know I'll raise my hand too. I'm tired of that phrase as well. I would love to have an election that doesn't feel that way. But we have a choice. We get to make a choice. And when you pull that lever, you can either choose to move this country forward and protect many of those rights, or make it worse. And so that's why I'm focused on doing what I can do to make sure that we elect Joe Biden again this fall, keep him in the White House, so that families like mine, families like yours, and even my daughter. I think about my daughter. My daughter is almost 3 years old, and I want her to have more rights than her parents do today. I want my daughter to be able to make her own choices about her own body. And right now we have a very political court hijacked by some of these extreme vocal Republicans. Who are blatantly saying that is what we will do. Put us back in the White House, and we will take away those rights.
It's so explicit. It's chilling, to hear it that way. And it's a powerful message to the voters, who are at this point probably the only ones with agency, with the ability to decide. Make sure your daughters have the rights that you had. Will you stick around? I have to sneak in a quick break.
Yeah.
All right, Justin's sticking around. We'll be right back. We're back with Chasten Buttigieg. I want to just tell our viewers what we're doing. We're waiting for Vice President Kamala Harris to begin her remarks in Arizona. She's obviously there because what we're talking about, this isn't a drill. Yeah. This is happening. The women of Arizona, in I think 11 more days, will revert back to a Civil War era law where almost all abortions are illegal unless the life of the mother is on the line. And we know how challenging that is for doctors. It sends them fleeing the state in most instances because it's in an emergency situation. It's not a bright, clear line. So essentially all abortions are banned in Arizona. She's out in Arizona a couple days after that happened. You've already hit the campaign trail. Just tell me your sense and what you think the stakes are. Why you, with your very young family, are sort of leaving it all out there.
Yeah, well, that's it. I want to leave it all in the field. I don't want to wake up on November 5th and feel like I could have done more. There's too much at stake. And we were talking about our kids. And when you become a parent, everything changes. I feel like my values haven't changed, but wow, is it just magnified when you are holding these two, precious, innocent children? What kind of earth are they going to inherit? One candidate believes in climate change, the other one doesn't. Will my daughter be able to make choices about her own body? One candidate believes in allowing women that right to choose, the other doesn't. My kids are starting school, terrifying, in a couple of years. But as a former teacher, it was a real reality. It is a reality in this country. Teachers and students go to school every day understanding that it could be their last. It should not be that way in the United States of America. And as a parent who's getting ready to send his kids to school. That is terrifying. And one of the candidates believes in doing something about gun violence and understands that guns are the #1 cause of death amongst young people in this country, and the other one doesn't. Donald Trump, when it came to school shootings, said we should get over it.
I don't know if you've done this yet, but they sell backpacks that are bulletproof.
Yeah.
And when you see the way a backpack sort of swamps a tiny kid, and you think about it, it guts you. I mean, being a parent right now in the face of just those 3 threats is a gutting experience.
Yeah, when I was a teacher, part of my job was to run the lockdown drills. And I had windows on both sides of my classroom. And, you'd get the kids under their desk, get them into certain corners, and I had to shut the blinds. But I knew damn well the blinds weren't going to do anything. If somebody came to our school with one of those weapons, like, the blinds weren't going to do anything. And even as their teacher running that drill, understanding that if this is what really comes to pass, I can't protect these kids. Now, as a parent, I'll have to send my kids to school with that same fear. And now it's just heightened because they're my kids. And I want to keep all these kids safe. But those are the choices that are in front of us, right? What kind of earth are our kids going to inherit? What kind of civil rights will they have? Will they have more rights than their parents or fewer? And will our leaders in Washington actually step up and do something about some of the biggest issues facing our country and our planet in our lifetimes? Or will we be drugged back, into the dustbins of history, right? To this candidate who doesn't believe in science, right? Who doesn't even believe in the experts who are telling him to do something about it. It's very scary, and that's why I will continuously hit the road for Biden-Harris. I will make sure that I can keep having these conversations. As someone who grew up in a very purple county in northern Michigan, having those conversations both at dinner tables back home and around the country. But the other thing that I see is that Dems are very fired up. So when I'm out there campaigning, I see people who are ready to do whatever it takes to make sure that we make that right choice in November.
I want to hear more about that because there's this distortion field around the polls, which I don't spend a lot of time on because having worked in politics, I know for better or worse, they can be really, really wrong. But what do you see that isn't showing up in polls?
Well, something I always try to remind myself of, and I don't know if my parents are watching this, but I use my dad as the bellwether for a lot of things. And so, a lot of us spend our days on social media, or we're very tied into what's going on in the news of the day. We watch television. We're watching your program every night, right? And so after the State of the Union, I called home because I wanted to see, how things were feeling back home. And I called my dad. I said, "What'd you think?" He said, "Oh, I wasn't watching that. I was working in the garage last night." And what were they talking about? And then I get into this, very heated political conversation with my father, and he's a constant reminder that folks aren't always watching television.
That's right.
That folks aren't always scrolling through Twitter, watching every reaction. Some people are working in the garage. And some people are coming home and putting dinner on the table. And my dad is very excited to vote for Joe Biden this fall, but you're probably not going to catch him answering the phone to take a poll, or you won't catch him watching
any cable
television.
News, yeah. I mean, I had a similar interaction after the State of the Union with a friend who I think is sort of center-right. I don't know if he's a Trump supporter or a Biden supporter, but he said that speech was amazing. I mean, is that how he really is? And then the stuff we see, I mean, he's like, he thought it was so different from his impression of Joe. And again, I don't really know if he watches a lot of live politics, but it reinforces this thing that I've been saying off the air, but it's a good thing for us to talk about. The campaign's really going to matter.
Yeah.
I mean, every news cycle is going to matter. And I think that's why even Donald Trump knows that being on trial for 6 weeks is not a great thing for him politically. What do you make about, or what do you see when you're out there about interest in this campaign and interest in the conversation and the choices? I mean, the Biden-Harris campaign has been very quick to get ads on the air as soon as these rules came to the Supreme Court in Arizona made this Civil War era law a reality for women there. There was an ad up the next day. I mean, the campaign seems to be firing on all cylinders. What is your sense of sort of the energy behind the campaign?
Yeah. Well, I do want to say I think the campaign is on. I mean, obviously, all campaigns are building an airplane while it's taking off.
Correct.
But I do want to dig in on something that you were talking about. Every news cycle will matter, but one of the other things that really matters is what we do with those people in our lives, the conversations we have with them. So someone like my dad, I mean, research shows that someone you love, they are likely to vote for the candidate that you want them to if someone they love or trust asks them to. So someone like my dad, it's not going to be, you know, the tweet, you know, that ends the campaign. It's not going to be a Washington Post article. It's not going to be
a web ad.
Right. It's not going to be a mailer. And some of those things work for other people. But the reason I think my parents moved in the way that they did politically is because their son came out and they started paying more attention. And someone that they loved asked them to make a choice. And those are the types of conversations that we need millions of Americans to have. And that's the hardest political work, I believe. Texting helps, calling helps, phone banking helps, posting on social media helps. But there are some people in your circles who are only going to vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris if you ask them to and you explain what is at stake in your personal life. That's why I talk about my family. That's why I talk about this ring. That's why I talk about my kids, the future of education and this planet. That is what's at stake for me. And that's what can move people.
They're going to be speaking every day. I hope you've got a double wide stroller. I think that's exactly right. And I mean, I keep having Amanda Zarowski back, the woman in Texas who lost she was pregnant. She'd named her daughter Willow. She lost her pregnancy at 18 weeks and she almost died of sepsis. But it's a story that is real. And it's a woman who very much wanted her pregnancy. Yeah. And it's this inconvenient wrinkle for Republicans, for extremist Republican policies on abortion, because it doesn't fit into the mold. Yeah. And if you love a woman or you love, if you are a woman or you love a woman or you know a woman or you have a child, you understand viscerally what the stakes are in this election.
That it requires a lot of vulnerability and it's really hard. But for me, getting to grow up to be this person was a miracle. When I was 13, 14 years old and sitting in my parents' basement, I would stare at my dad's gun cabinet. And I thought that was the only way out. I would never know love. I would never know family. I'd never know community. I thought I was the only gay person in the world. And I felt like the world was telling me, pull the trigger. I very much feel like this election is about one candidate who looks at that kid and says, I've got your back. And another candidate who surrounds himself with people who are actively saying, pull the trigger. That is what they believe. They do not support LGBTQ people. They do not support families like my own. And they are not doing anything actively to make life better or safer for kids like my own, for families like my own, and for many other people around this country. That is why I will campaign every single day, if I have a babysitter, for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.